They laughed at her appearance, whispered in the hallways, mocked every detail of her strange way of walking, speaking, dressing. To everyone, Christine was just another odd, misplaced employee, completely invisible. But what no one knew was that she was the secret wife of the most powerful man in the company. An arranged marriage, a loveless contract, a silent pact. And behind every humble gaze, there was a woman who had sworn she would no longer be ignored. When the truth comes out, no one, not even the CEO, will walk away unscathed. Christine adjusted the misaligned wig in front of the mirror, making sure no shiny brown strands slipped out from under the dull synthetic bangs. She put on her thick-rimmed glasses, and finally, the oversized beige sweater, 3 sizes too big. She was ready for another day of being someone she was not. No one in that sleek, modern building in the heart of the city suspected who she truly was. To everyone, including the employees on the 18th floor, Christine was nothing more than a strange, introverted, and unattractive woman. At least, that's how they described her when they thought she wasn't listening. And most of the time, she was. Gabriel, the company's CEO, was rarely seen with her in public. The two had married in an arrangement made by their parents, a union between families, without love, without passion, not even a single dinner for two, a contract. Christine agreed on one condition, that he would never be required to love her, as long as he respected her. He agreed without hesitation. She, in turn, chose to disappear beneath layers of clothing, poorly applied makeup, and a timid posture. Better to be ignored by someone who didn't know how to love than to be used by someone who only saw surface beauty. But that morning, as she crossed the lobby with light, quiet steps, she heard the muffled laughter again. It's her again, that weirdo. How does the boss even put up with her? Must be out of obligation. He could have any woman and ended up with that? The words dripped like poison behind forced smiles. Christine kept her head down. She had learned that responding only made things worse. Upstairs, Gabriel reviewed reports. His custom suit, impeccable as always. Tall, serious, calculated. His eyes moved across the numbers, but his mind wandered. He knew Christine was in the building. He could feel her presence, even without seeing her. He had never mistreated her, but he had never drawn close either. To everyone else, she was invisible. To him, an enigma. Mr. Gabriel, the board meeting starts in 10 minutes, said Rochelle, his personal assistant, and one of the most vocal when it came to mocking Christine. Let them know I'll be there shortly. Rochelle bit her lip and hesitated. Christine stopped by earlier. I think she left, I don't know, a cake. It's in the break room. Want me to throw it out? Gabriel frowned. She did. Yeah. Should I? No. Keep it. Rochelle pursed her lips, visibly annoyed. Meanwhile, Christine stood by the break room window, watching the cars rush by on the street below. The cake she had left, her favorite recipe, remained untouched. Maybe he wouldn't eat it. Maybe he didn't like it. Maybe he didn't even know it was from her. But she knew. She knew that even when unseen, some gestures leave a mark. She didn't want pity, nor did she want to be desired for something that fades with time. She wanted to be recognized for who she truly was, and maybe the time hadn't yet come to take off the mask. Christine grew up in a traditional family, where social status and reputation were everything. She was always seen as ordinary, someone with no remarkable traits or aspirations, and her parents, with their rigid worldview, reinforced that belief year after year. By the time she reached adulthood, marriage was no longer a romantic goal. It was a social strategy. Gabriel's family and hers had been distant for years, but when he emerged as a potential candidate, the conversations between the families grew more intense. Gabriel, a successful architect and CEO, was considered a perfect match for any woman. He wasn't looking for love. He wanted a strategic alliance, and Christine's parents saw that as ideal. They didn't want their daughter marrying someone unknown, someone without roots in society. Still young and inexperienced, Christine found herself torn between her parents' expectations and her own emotions. She knew that marrying Gabriel would never be about passion, only convenience and security. When her parents realized she was hesitant, they began to pressure her more directly, insisting this was the best opportunity she'd ever have. "Do you really think someone like him will come around twice?" her mother asked one night. Christine didn't answer. She feared that resisting them would mean losing their approval, and with it, the only real connection she had to stability. So she surrendered. She accepted the engagement not with joy, but with resignation. Maybe, she told herself, happiness could grow later. Maybe safety was enough. And when the reality of her role set in, the wife of a man she barely knew, she did what she felt she had to do. She hid, not just emotionally, physically too. She created a version of herself that wouldn't invite interest, wouldn't provoke desire, wouldn't trigger rejection. The sweaters, the heavy glasses, the timid posture, they weren't just shields, they were barriers, tools to survive a relationship without expectations. She believed that if Gabriel never truly saw her, never felt drawn to her, their lives would remain calm, controlled, predictable. She had no idea that behind that decision waited consequences she could never have imagined. When Gabriel showed up for their first meeting, Christine was already prepared for what she believed would be a mere formality. He walked into the restaurant in a flawless suit, radiating the presence of a successful man used to making deals and following rules. Her first impression of him was exactly that, a man of distance and calculation, someone more interested in sealing an agreement than in building a genuine relationship. She watched as he sat down, his eyes devoid of warmth. Gabriel didn't seem to be there to get to know her, but rather to complete a task. There was no spark, no curiosity, no sign of attraction, only a cold politeness. Christine couldn't help but wonder if he was truly interested in her at all, or if this was just another transaction for him. What disturbed her most was that, despite his impeccable appearance and high status, Gabriel seemed indifferent to everything around him, including the woman sitting right in front of him. Perhaps for him, this was just one more step in his carefully structured life. He didn't look like a man fulfilling a dream. He looked like a man fulfilling an obligation. The silence between them was awkward, broken only by Gabriel's polite questions about her life, questions that sounded more like they came from a handbook on etiquette than genuine interest. The fact that he didn't seem even slightly curious about her background made Christine feel even more insecure. Gabriel was not the kind of man she had ever imagined building a real relationship with, and yet, she sat there, playing her part, because her father, seated a few tables away, was watching, and Christine knew she couldn't disappoint him. Throughout the dinner, Gabriel kept a formal, detached tone, though now and then he looked at her in a way she couldn't quite interpret, somewhere between calculated coldness and vague indifference. To her, it was already clear. The marriage they were about to enter wouldn't be a love story. It would be a union shaped by expectations and circumstance. Christine did her best not to show how uncomfortable she felt. She knew she had to hide her true self and fit into the mold her new role demanded. She put on her most convincing smile, kept up appearances, and tried to adapt to the scene playing out before her, a scene that seemed to define her destiny. She had convinced herself that her role was to be the obedient wife, to stay quiet, to not stir trouble, and if possible, to keep her emotional distance, just to avoid more pain. Gabriel, on the other hand, seemed more invested in the refined environment around them than in the woman across the table. His vision of her as a wife appeared to be purely symbolic, a checkbox in the life plan he had committed to. Christine wasn't a person to him. She was a formality, a figure in a contract. Yet still, something stopped him from treating her with complete detachment. Beneath his cold exterior, Gabriel knew that this woman, whether he liked it or not, was now at the center of his life, and something in his posture suggested that he was aware of standing at a crossroads. What would happen next was in both their hands. But for now, Gabriel seemed far more concerned with logistics than with connection. The sound of Christine's heels echoed against the marble floor as she stepped into the grand headquarters of Arcline Developments. She wore thick, vintage-style glasses, a wig with frizzy strands, and loose, shapeless clothes. At the reception desk, sharply dressed employees, smartphones in hand, rehearsed smiles on their faces, glanced at her sideways, puzzled by the figure who looked like she'd stepped out of another decade. It was her first official day as an administrative assistant, or at least, that was the carefully crafted narrative, supported by a single ally, the lawyer who had drawn up her arranged marriage. The agreement with Gabriel was clear, a 2-year contract, no emotional involvement, no marital obligations, just a legal marriage to satisfy family and financial interests. But for Christine, it wasn't just a formality. It was a chance to prove something to herself. Can you leave your pride at the door? said one of the secretaries mockingly as she handed Christine a folder of documents. Rochelle, the CEO's personal assistant, and arguably the most feared and admired employee in the entire company, approached, smiling with quiet malice. "So, you're the new girl?" Her gaze scanned Christine from the worn shoes to the messy bun. "I hope you know how to make coffee, because clearly, looks aren't your strength." Christine forced a shy smile. She didn't answer. She had prepared for this, for the humiliation, the whispered laughter, the judgmental stares. She just hadn't expected the hostility to be so sharp. Throughout the day, she was treated like she was invisible. She received the dullest tasks: filing papers, fetching packages, labeling folders. The employees murmured among themselves, and every chuckle in the hallway felt like a jab to the ribs. "Did you see the creature they hired?" someone said. "Maybe she's related to someone powerful," another whispered. No one knew she already shared a roof with the CEO, that she lived under the same contract of silence and emotional distance. But Christine didn't back down. As she labeled documents in silence, she watched. Every face, every behavior. She observed. She memorized. At the end of the workday, while the hallways emptied, she walked quietly past the main office. The door was slightly open. Gabriel was there, his back turned, staring out at the city through the window. An elegant man with straight shoulders, his hands clasped behind him. For a moment, she paused. Maybe he would hear her footsteps. Maybe he would turn around, but he didn't. Christine simply continued down the corridor in silence, whispering a promise to herself. She would endure. This was the hardest part. And someday, everything would change. The next morning, Christine arrived before everyone else. She wanted to avoid the glances, the whispers, and that oppressive energy that filled the reception area after 9 a.m. Carrying a box of documents, she slipped quietly down the central hallway to her desk, which was tucked beside the break room. No one had arrived yet. For a brief moment, she felt relief, but peace never lasted long. "Well, our model employee beat the cleaning staff today." Rochelle's shrill voice sliced through the silence like a slap. Behind her, 3 other women stood holding coffee cups and wearing poisonous smiles. Christine said nothing. She focused on her papers. Rochelle stepped closer, leaning provocatively on the edge of the desk. "I heard Mr. Gabriel, our CEO, personally requested your hiring. That's interesting. Very interesting." She snapped her fingers as if the irony in her voice were some kind of refined joke. "Or maybe he's just got a philanthropic side we didn't know about, right, girls?" one of them added, laughing loudly. The teasing didn't stop there. All morning, every task assigned to Christine came laced with sarcasm and malice. "Could you take this contract up to the 21st floor? But please use the stairs. The elevator is for guests. File this folder, but be careful. It's confidential material. We wouldn't want anyone accidentally taking it home, would we?" Every word, every look, seemed designed to put her in what they believed was her place, beneath everyone else. And the worst part? Gabriel saw it all. During an informal meeting in the lobby, he walked right past Christine without even lifting his eyes. She was holding a tray of coffee cups for the managers. One of the cups slipped and hit the floor, spilling everywhere and staining her worn-out shoes. The laughter came instantly. Gabriel kept walking, speaking on the phone, as if she didn't exist. That night, Christine returned home in silence. The mansion she shared with him felt even larger in its emptiness. He was having dinner on the veranda, reading documents. She walked past him without saying a word. Upstairs, she removed the wig, took off the fake glasses, and tied her real hair into a sleek bun. She stared into the mirror. Her eyes were red, but there was something else there. A subtle, sharpened glint. It wasn't sadness. It was resolve. She wouldn't cry. Not this time. The humiliation cut deep, yes, but it was also shaping her. And Gabriel's indifference. She was taking note, because soon he would have to look at her, really look, and by then, it would be too late to pretend he didn't care. The next day, Christine returned with the same disheveled appearance, but inside, something had shifted. Something had awakened. That morning, Rochelle outdid herself. She handed Christine a file with over 300 pages, not by placing it on her desk, but by dumping the entire pile in front of her, making the papers scatter across the floor with a loud slap. Heads turned, then quickly turned away again, once they saw who it was. Christine knelt down in silence, gathering the sheets with trembling hands. A subtle laugh slipped from Rochelle's lips. "Oh, sorry. The box just slipped. You know how it is. Gravity." And that's when a deep, cold voice sliced through the room. "Rochelle." Silence fell instantly. Gabriel stood at the entrance to the office, his eyes locked on the scene. Christine on the floor, Rochelle still smiling, unaware of what was coming. "Come to my office, now." Rochelle turned pale. She had never heard that tone from him before. Minutes later, the entire floor was buzzing. Rumors spread quickly. Rochelle had received a formal warning, and not just her. Everyone involved in the harassment was called into a private meeting. At lunchtime, Gabriel did something he never did. He came down to the break room. He approached Christine, who was sitting alone in a corner with her modest meal. She stood up immediately, but he gestured for her to stay seated. "They won't bother you again." Christine looked up at him. There was something different in his eyes. For the first time, he looked human. Less CEO, more man. "Thank you," she whispered, barely audible. Gabriel hesitated. His eyes dropped to her hands, red from the paper cuts and heavy lifting, then to her plate, simple, untouched. He didn't say anything else. He just nodded and walked away. That night, Christine went up to her room and for the first time allowed herself to smile. It wasn't a victory, but it was a beginning. She knew something had changed, and even if he didn't say it out loud, his actions were louder than words. Gabriel wasn't just the stranger who ignored her. He had seen her, and now everyone else would start seeing her too. In the days that followed, the atmosphere at the company changed. No one openly made jokes about Christine anymore, but the silence around her was heavy. The curious glances and whispered comments hadn't disappeared. They had only changed tone. Now there was doubt, suspicion, even fear. After all, the weird girl from reception had the direct backing of the CEO, and in the middle of it all, a new presence emerged in the building. George, Gabriel's younger brother. George was everything Gabriel wasn't. While Gabriel was reserved, stern, and sparing with his words, George was outgoing, charismatic, and seemingly harmless. He dressed more casually, mingled easily with staff, and always wore a charming smile on his face. But there was something in his eyes that unsettled Christine, something too sharp, as if he were always watching more than he let on. One afternoon, Christine went down to the records room to look for documents, and accidentally walked in on George alone in the executive office, rummaging through a folder marked with Gabriel's name. The moment he saw her, he slammed the drawer shut and offered a gentle smile. Christine, right? Sorry, I was just looking for a report. Gabriel's so meticulous. I thought I'd help out." She didn't answer, just nodded, cautiously. As she climbed the stairs, she could feel his eyes following her. That night, she found Gabriel in the library at home. It had become a habit to find him there, always surrounded by papers, poring over spreadsheets with a glass of whiskey at his side. "Your brother, is he working here now?" she asked, trying to sound casual. Gabriel looked up for a second, then returned to his reading. "He's assisting with the expansion contracts. Temporarily. Do you trust him?" Silence. Too long. "George is my brother," Gabriel finally said. "That doesn't mean we share the same values." Christine felt a chill run down her spine. She didn't push the subject further. But that night, lying beside a man who still felt like a stranger, one thing became clear. Someone at that company was plotting something. And it wasn't a coincidence that Gabriel had started paying more attention to her. Maybe he knew more than he let on. And maybe she was more involved in this story than she ever imagined. The following week, George began approaching Christine with unsettling frequency. He always seemed to show up in hallways, elevators, or the company cafe. His demeanor was light, his compliments ambiguous, and his charm just a little too sweet to be sincere. "You know, Christine," he said one afternoon, leaning casually against the coffee machine, "most people around here still don't really get who you are. Maybe not even Gabriel does." She simply looked at him, trying to keep a calm expression. George stepped a little closer. "If I were you, I'd take better advantage of my position. You're the CEO's wife. You could get anything you want, including finding out what's being hidden from you." Christine swallowed hard. "What do you mean by that?" He smiled. "I'm just saying there are things happening. Contracts, stock transfers, decisions, and maybe you've got more power than you think, if you know where to look." It was bait, a calculated provocation. That night, Christine couldn't sleep. Her mind spun, racing with the poisoned words George had planted. She had already suspected something strange about certain documents being passed around. But now it began to feel like a real conspiracy. And what disturbed her most was Gabriel's silence. Why wasn't he telling her anything? Did he not trust her? Or worse, was she just another piece in a much bigger game? The next day, George was waiting for her in the company parking lot. "Here," he said, handing her a flash drive. "You deserve to know the truth. What you do with it is up to you." Christine hesitated. It felt wrong, but her instinct, the same one that had warned her from the beginning, spoke louder. She placed the flash drive in her bag. That night, alone in the guest room that had quietly become her silent refuge inside the mansion, she plugged the device into her laptop and clicked on the only file it contained. What she saw made her heart race. Stock transfer documents, forged signatures, meeting minutes referencing a company sale, signed under Gabriel's name, but with dates and clauses he would never have approved. George was trying to sell part of the company behind everyone's back, and if he succeeded, Gabriel would lose controlling interest. Everything he had built, and protected so fiercely, would be taken from him from the inside out. And she, Christine, she could be the key to stopping it, or to destroying him completely. The next morning, Christine descended the stairs with a pale, determined face. The flash drive was still in her bag, but it felt heavier than anything she had ever carried. She crossed the mansion's grand hall as if walking on glass, until she found Gabriel at the breakfast table, calmly reading reports on his tablet with his usual expression of elegant detachment. "I need to talk to you," she said firmly, her voice lower than she wanted, but tense with urgency. Gabriel looked up. Now. He motioned for the staff to leave. Silence filled the room as they were left alone. "Your brother is trying to stab you in the back," Christine fired. "He's been tampering with documents, forging signatures. He's trying to sell part of the company. Behind your back." Gabriel's brow furrowed. He closed the tablet slowly. "And how do you know this?" She pulled the flash drive from her bag and dropped it on the table. "He gave me that. I saw everything. He came to me. He told me I could have more power than I imagined, that you don't trust me, that I'm just a decoration in your castle." For a moment, Gabriel's face froze, but it wasn't surprise. It was restrained anger. "You've been meeting with George behind my back?" "Me?" Christine stepped forward, her eyes brimming. "He harassed me at work, followed me at your mother's house, went through your files in your office, and you're asking if I'm the one hiding something?" Gabriel stood up, his eyes intense. "You should have come to me immediately. I tried, but you never listen. You always look at me like I'm a burden, an embarrassment, something you have to keep hidden. And now that I finally discovered something important, you really think I did it against you?" Silence. Bitter silence. Gabriel took a deep breath and walked over to the window, as if the garden light might help clear his thoughts. "I knew something was off with George, but I didn't think he'd go this far," he said at last. "I was investigating on my own. I was trying to protect you." Christine stared at him. "Protect me from what? From him? Or from yourself?" Gabriel turned, and for the first time since their wedding, his eyes looked vulnerable. "I didn't know how to deal with you, Christine. You're unpredictable. You hide. You wear masks. I kept my distance because I was afraid to actually feel something." Her chest tightened. That hit harder than any humiliation she'd ever endured. "So it's my fault you're a coward?" His eyes pleaded without words. "I just didn't want to lose you, even without knowing why." Christine held back the tears. "Well, maybe now you have." And she walked out of the room, leaving behind the man who had finally confessed his fear. Too late. The company's event hall was full. Executives, investors, senior staff, all gathered for the presentation of a new architectural project that promised to revolutionize the corporation's image. Christine had never stepped foot there as the CEO's wife, but that afternoon, she entered through the main doors in an elegant dress, her hair loose, her face uncovered, stunning, confident, and impossible to ignore. On stage, Gabriel paused mid-sentence the moment he saw her. The room seemed to freeze. In the front row, George went pale, as if he'd seen a ghost. Christine walked to the center of the audience, flash drive in hand. "Before any investment is approved," she said loudly, "there's something everyone here needs to see." A nervous buzz rippled through the room. "Christine," "This isn't the time," Gabriel said, tense. "It's exactly the right time." She climbed the stage and plugged the flash drive into the main computer. On the screen appeared spreadsheets with suspicious transactions, manipulated files, and video clips of George forging digital signatures. The room exploded in whispers. "This is ridiculous," George shouted. "She's making this up." But with one click, the recording played. George, boasting to Christine about his plan, bragging about how he'd take over the company. The silence that followed was deafening. One of the directors stood up, pale. "Mr. Gabriel, is this real?" Gabriel's face was stone, carved by betrayal. He nodded slowly. "Yes, and it will be treated as a crime." George tried to run, but 2 security guards were already on alert. Christine stepped off the stage without a word. Gabriel didn't speak, but his eyes followed her. Intense, unreadable. The woman they all dismissed, the one they mocked, ignored, and hid, had saved everything. In the parking lot, just as she was about to get into her car, Christine heard hurried footsteps behind her. It was Gabriel's mother. "Dear, I had no idea what was happening," she said, genuine emotion in her voice. "You saved my son. You saved this company. And we—" Christine cut her off gently. "I didn't do it for you. I did it for me, because for the first time I refused to keep being invisible." And then she left, with her head held high, and her heart broken. Yes, but finally free. Days passed after the company scandal. George had been taken into custody for pretrial detention. The corporation's stock plummeted for a few days, but began recovering after Gabriel's official statement confirmed his brother's removal and the launch of an internal restructuring plan. And yet, the silence between Christine and Gabriel was louder than all the chaos. Christine had moved back to her old apartment, the one she lived in before the marriage. It was small, but warm. A potted plant clung to life on the windowsill, and she was determined to keep it that way. For the first time in a long while, she went to bed with a clean face. No disguises, no masks, no one to pretend to love her. The mornings were calm. She made coffee, read the news, wrote in her journal. Sometimes she cried without knowing why. Sometimes she laughed at herself for missing him. Gabriel, on the other hand, threw himself into work. He redecorated his office, took down every framed design George had ever signed, and banned employees from mentioning his brother's name. But the emptiness he felt wasn't just about family betrayal. It was Christine. She had taken up space inside him, space he hadn't even known existed. He spent his days replaying moments in his head, trying to figure out when he had started missing her, truly missing her, not as his contract wife, but as a woman, as a presence. He remembered how she would serve tea without making eye contact, how her hands trembled when he came home late, how she smiled quietly whenever she saw a dog on the street, how she froze the day he, without thinking, complimented her hair, one of the rare times she wasn't wearing a wig. And most of all, he remembered her courage that day in the boardroom. Why had he never really seen her? Meanwhile, Christine asked herself different questions. Had she done the right thing by exposing everything? Deep down, had she wanted Gabriel to stop her from leaving? Did he feel anything for her? She didn't have the answers, but she had peace. Little by little, she resumed her former profession as an illustrator. She opened a small online shop to sell her work. One day, an unexpected commission arrived. A client requested a drawing of a woman looking out at the ocean with a caption below, "You were never invisible to me." There was no name, but she recognized the handwriting. That night, Christine stared at the finished drawing. The woman by the sea had soft features, but her gaze was strong. She held a red scarf, blowing in the wind. The caption, "You were never invisible to me," still echoed like an intimate whisper. Even without a signature, Christine knew. Gabriel. It was the kind of quiet gesture he would make. Discreet, almost cowardly, but full of meaning. And maybe regret. She gently ran her fingers along the frame, and for a few seconds, considered calling him. But she didn't. Across the city, Gabriel stared at his phone screen. Her number was still saved. He had typed out a message dozens of times, and erased it just as many. Something simple like, "Are you okay?" Or direct like, "I miss you." But no version of send felt reachable, not with the weight of guilt tightening around his throat. It wasn't just longing. It was the ache of late realization. He had spent months beside an extraordinary woman without seeing her. Not truly. She had hidden behind the disguise he allowed, and in many ways encouraged. Gabriel didn't know if he deserved a second chance, but he knew he couldn't bear not trying. Christine, in turn, was trapped in a quiet, unspoken dilemma. Part of her wanted to believe there was something real between them, but another part, the one still bruised, still realistic, whispered that maybe he only wanted her now because he'd finally seen her beauty, because the dynamic had shifted, because now she fit better into the image of a powerful CEO in love. But what if it wasn't that? What if his look during that boardroom confrontation, the way he had reached for her afterward, the unspoken apology in the commissioned portrait, were all sincere? The next morning, Christine found a black envelope slipped under her door. Inside were 2 tickets to an art exhibit titled The Invisible Layers of a Woman. On the back of one ticket, a handwritten note: "It's not about what the eyes can see. It's about what the heart never forgot." She clutched the ticket to her chest, her heart racing. It was an invitation, but also an apology. She was still hurt, still carried the weight of humiliation and that long, aching silence. But for the first time, she could also feel the weight of loneliness from the other side. Love, she thought, isn't an eternal promise. It's a process, sometimes messy, imperfect, filled with stumbles. And maybe, just maybe, this was the moment to start rebuilding. The gallery hall was lit in soft amber tones and gentle shadows, reflecting off the canvases that filled the walls with wordless stories. Christine entered with quiet steps, wearing a simple nude-toned dress, her hair loose in soft waves. Her beauty now flowed effortlessly. No masks, no disguises. But more than that, there was a silent strength in her walk. She hadn't come to impress. She had come to meet herself. In the center of the room, surrounded by distracted guests and discreet cameras, Gabriel stood motionless in front of a large piece done in charcoal and gold paint. The painting showed 2 silhouettes, a woman sitting with her back turned, holding a mirror, and reflected inside it, a man in a suit looking at her, not with desire, but with regret. Christine saw him before he saw her. For a moment, she considered leaving, but her body stayed, maybe because deep down, she wanted to hear. He noticed her when the air around him seemed to go still. His eyes followed her slowly, until she stopped before the painting beside him. Their gazes met, like an invisible string being pulled between 2 ends of longing. "You came," he said, not stepping too close. "I got your invitation," she replied, neutral, but not cold. "I wanted you to see it," he said, nodding toward the central painting. "It's not about you, but it's all about you." Christine smiled softly. "And who else could draw my pain so precisely?" Gabriel hesitated, then breathed deeply. "I know I failed you. I was blind, not to your looks, but to my own pride. I liked you, even when you wore those terrible clothes and spoke like you were always apologizing for existing." She crossed her arms. "Then why didn't you ever say anything?" "Because I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid to feel, afraid to care, afraid to become vulnerable next to someone who, in silence, was showing me what real love looks like." Time seemed to pause. The gallery crowd faded into the background like part of a blurred painting. Christine stepped forward, just once. "You didn't love me when I was ugly," she said, like testing the fragility of a bridge before crossing. Gabriel shook his head. "You were never ugly. I was the one who was blind." Silence. She lowered her gaze, brushing her fingers against the corner of the exhibit ticket still tucked in her bag, then lifted her face. "And now?" she asked. "Do you love me because I changed, or because you did?" Gabriel didn't answer right away. He stepped closer, then closer again, until they stood near enough to feel each other's warmth. "I love you," he said, with quiet certainty. "Not for what you show, not for what you hide, but because now I finally see." Christine felt something break inside her, but it wasn't pain. It was armor. It was the shield falling, and the girl hidden within the woman smiled. "Just a little. Maybe," she whispered. "I'm beginning to see you too." And then, no more words. Just a reunion that didn't need to be explained, only lived. The days following the gallery reunion unfolded with unexpected tenderness. There were no impulsive promises, no rehearsed declarations, only small gestures, quiet and profound, like watering a nearly wilted flower, believing it might still bloom. Gabriel didn't push for an immediate return. He respected Christine's space, but he made sure his changes were visible. At the office building, he ordered a full restructuring of the executive assistant staff, not as hollow punishment, but as a clear message. Respect and empathy were now non-negotiable. The new receptionist, a graceful middle-aged woman named Amelia, welcomed every visitor with a warm smile that reached her eyes. And in the waiting room, where once echoed whispers and venomous laughter, now there was silence and flowers. One day, Christine arrived at the office for a scheduled meeting on foundation projects she coordinated. On her desk sat a pale leather folder, tied with a simple gold ribbon. Inside, she found a sketchbook. Every page held drawings of flowers. None of them were perfect. Some had fallen petals, others had crooked leaves. A few were entirely in black and white, but everyone was drawn with soft, vulnerable strokes. At the end of the book, there was a note. All of these flowers would be invisible to those who only see the obvious. Thank you for teaching me how to look at what truly matters. G. Christine stared at the note for a long time, feeling something gentle and warm unravel inside her. It wasn't a grand declaration. It was acknowledgement, an apology without the word sorry. And to her, that felt more honest than 1,000 speeches. That same week, she was invited to visit a public school supported by the foundation. Gabriel was there, quietly blending in with the children, helping build a small community garden. He wore simple clothes, his knees smudged with dirt, laughing as a little boy taught him how to plant cilantro. "You're terrible at this," she teased as she approached. He looked up and grinned. "Getting a little better every day." Christine smiled back. It wasn't about planting cilantro. It was about finally planting what had never been planted between them before. A kind of love not born from contracts, appearances, or expectations, but from growth. At the end of the day, they walked side by side in silence. They sat on a wooden bench beneath a tree, its leaves dancing softly in the wind. "I don't want to go back to what we were," he said. She looked at him, surprised. "I want something new," he continued. "Something we've never been. A love that chooses every day and doesn't need masks." Christine took a deep breath. Her heart wasn't racing with euphoria, but it beat steady, certain. "Then maybe it's time," she said, "to finally get to know each other. For real." Gabriel reached out his hand, not as someone claiming possession, but as someone inviting a new journey. Christine took it, and there, beneath that tree, no audience, no status, no makeup, two souls chose to begin again. It wasn't the end of the story. It was the true beginning. The renewed beginning between Christine and Gabriel felt promising, but the universe, or perhaps destiny, had plans to test this new foundation with something deeper: the truth. One humid afternoon, while sorting through old foundation documents, Christine found a brown envelope tucked between forgotten folders. Inside were copies of contracts, financial reports, and one document bearing George's name, Gabriel's brother. She frowned. The paper detailed a suspicious financial transaction tied to the donation of a company-owned property to a non-existent charity. The signature at the bottom read Gabriel's name, or looked like it. Her heart raced. Part of her wanted to close the envelope and pretend she hadn't seen it, but another part, the woman who had learned never to hide again, pushed her forward. She brought the documents straight to Gabriel's office, where she found him thoughtful, staring out the window. "We need to talk," she said bluntly. Gabriel turned and looked at her. He saw something firm in her eyes, and that, more than the envelope, warned him something serious was about to unfold. She handed him the papers and waited. Gabriel read them in silence. When he finished, he sighed and placed both hands on the desk. "I remember this," he said quietly. "At the time, I gave George responsibility for handling donations. He said he wanted to prove himself. You signed this?" "Yes, but I never saw where the money actually went." Christine crossed her arms, not defensively, but to keep herself grounded. "Then why didn't you investigate?" Gabriel hesitated. "Because, deep down, I didn't want to face the idea that my own brother would betray me. I chose the comfort of ignorance over the pain of truth." The answer hurt, but it was honest. She sat down, shoulders heavy. "George was the first to doubt me, to hint that I was using you, and all this time, he was the one working behind everyone's back." Gabriel nodded grimly. "This needs to come out," she said. "The company, the foundation, us. We all deserve a clean start." Gabriel stood. You're right. It's time I did what I should have done long ago." The next day, Gabriel called an emergency meeting with the shareholders. With rare courage, he presented the documents, explained the facts, and took full responsibility for his failure to supervise. He didn't blame George. He blamed his own omission. Christine watched from the back of the room, tears held tightly behind her eyes. It wasn't just about justice. It was about watching the man she had once nearly given up on rise, not as a CEO, but as someone willing to change. The scandal hit the media like a bomb. George tried to defend himself, but the evidence spoke louder. He was removed from the company and legal proceedings began. That evening, Christine and Gabriel sat side by side in silence on the couch, in the house that was now theirs. "You lost a brother," she whispered. Gabriel looked at her. "Maybe, but I gained the truth, and I gained you, not as a promise, but as something real." She didn't answer with words. She simply rested her head on his shoulder, and in the middle of chaos, something real finally began to bloom. In the days following the public scandal, the foundation underwent a full audit. Gabriel became the focus of media attention, and for the first time, he was praised not as a visionary CEO, but as a man brave enough to confront the shadows of his own family. But for Christine, the real climax wasn't in the headlines. It came quietly. One rainy afternoon, while organizing personal files in the home library, she stumbled upon an old notebook with small handwriting and a worn blue cover. Inside were handwritten pages, letters, or perhaps unsent diary entries. She hesitated, then opened it. The very first line hit her like a punch to the chest. "I don't know if I'll ever have the courage to show what I've written, but I had to document how much I regret not seeing who she truly was." The words flowed like confessions. Gabriel wrote of his fear of being deceived, his shame for having judged Christine by her appearance, and his anger at seeing in her the reflection of his own insecurities. "I built a wall thinking it would protect me, but really, it only kept me from feeling anything at all." Christine pressed the notebook to her chest. She had fought so hard to prove she was worthy of love, when in truth, she always had been. He simply hadn't been able to see her. When Gabriel entered the room, he found tears streaming down her face, and the notebook in her hands. "You were never going to tell me?" she asked, her voice trembling. He stood still for a few seconds, then walked over and sat beside her. "I wrote it to keep from falling apart," he admitted. "I didn't know how to talk to you after everything I'd done. How could I possibly explain all the time I wasted?" She looked at him, with truth, with presence, with choices. Gabriel took a deep breath. "Then here's my choice," he said. "I'm selling my majority share of the company. The foundation will be managed by an independent board. And I want to start over, with you, away from the masks, the contracts, the corporate logic that almost destroyed us." Christine's eyes widened. "You're giving it all up?" "No," he said gently. "I'm finally choosing to live." Her chest burned, tears rising again. It wasn't just about him giving it all up for her. It was about someone finally breaking free from his own armor. "And what if I don't want to walk away from it all?" she teased, smiling through the tears. "What if I want to keep building this project, this legacy?" "Then we go together," he said. "You lead, I support, without either of us needing to disappear to let the other exist." She let out a shaky laugh. That evening, Christine walked into the foundation's boardroom for the first time, without smudged makeup, without oversized clothing, not to impress, but to inspire. She was now a complete woman, not because of Gabriel, but in spite of him, and with him. The old Christine had been rejected. The new one didn't seek approval. She carried within her the power of someone who had survived. And Gabriel, watching her step into leadership, finally understood the true meaning of love with a twist. It's not about changing for someone. It's about finding yourself beside the one who saw you, even when you were in pieces. The months that followed were dedicated to rebuilding. Not walls, not reputations, but connection. Christine and Gabriel decided to travel abroad, far from the cameras, the boardrooms, and the reports. They chose a quiet village in Tuscany, where no one knew them as CEO and estranged wife. There, they were simply two people learning to see each other again, without armor, without contracts, without expectations. One evening, sitting on a veranda overlooking the vineyards, she asked, her voice light, her bare feet resting on the worn wooden floor, "Do you think we're still the same?" Gabriel paused for a moment. "I think we're restored versions," he said, "like antique furniture, still bearing the marks, but now shining with more truth." Christine smiled. For the first time in a long while, there were no loose ends in her soul. Back in the city, Christine officially took over leadership of the social foundation, which she renamed New Beginnings. Gabriel preferred to serve as an advisor. No titles, no nameplates, just someone willing to support the cause. The headlines claimed the couple had risen from the ashes, but there were no ashes. There was only light, soft, steady, built in silence. At a charity event where Christine was honored as Leader of the Year, a journalist asked, "How did you deal with so much criticism and humiliation? What was your turning point?" Christine didn't hesitate. "I got tired of waiting for others to truly see me, so I decided to show myself, with courage." The room gave her a standing ovation. Gabriel, in the back of the hall, watched with tearful eyes. For the first time, he felt proud, not as her husband, but as a man who had the privilege of loving someone like her. That night, when they returned home, Christine found an envelope resting on the bed. Inside was a handwritten note, the lettering firm and steady. "You were once my contract. Now you are my destiny. No clauses, no masks, only you. G." She smiled. Their story wasn't perfect, but it was honest, filled with mistakes, silences, and twists, just like real life. And so, from a marriage of convenience, came a love that could never have been planned. Because sometimes, the real romance begins when the truth finally comes to light. Months later, a new garden bloomed in the backyard of the old Salvatore mansion. Christine had planted roses, not the perfect kind you see in catalogs, but ones with asymmetrical petals, stained leaves, and scents that shifted with the wind. She called them twist roses. There, she welcomed young women in vulnerable situations, offering guidance, support, and stories. Stories like hers. Stories that taught not every ugly beginning ends in tragedy, and that sometimes it's in chaos that the truest kind of beauty grows. Gabriel, now with stubble on his face and less weight in his eyes, spent his time building wooden benches for the garden. None of them were perfectly straight, and that made him smile. One late afternoon, a little girl, the daughter of one of the women in the program, ran up to Christine with a crooked flower in her hands. "Auntie, this one's for you. It's the weirdest rose I could find." Christine received it as if it were a diamond. "It's my favorite now." The girl frowned. "Why?" "Because it has curves," Christine said gently, "just like life." The sun dipped behind the mountains as Christine and Gabriel sat side by side on one of the uneven benches. He held her hand, said nothing, and didn't need to. At the garden entrance, a simple wooden sign read, "May no one feel the need to hide in order to be loved." That's where what once began as a contract finally became a love without clauses, without masks, without fear. A love with a twist. Your heart knows the way. Subscribe and follow the beauty.